Why poetry? Why flash fiction?
Well, I think with both of these forms of writing, particularly the poetry and also flash fiction, they're forms where you have to be very concise with what you're writing. You have to be very much aware of each and every word that you're putting down. Excuse me. So there's skills there that are really, really valuable, no matter what kind of writing you do, no matter what genre you're working in. I've been writing poetry since I was very young, so I've kind of followed a lot of poets and tried to hone my own skills in poetry, because I just think it's really valuable. It really adds to the skill level of any writer when they're trying to write. And it doesn't matter what, even nonfiction, fiction, whatever they're writing. The skills that you learn as you're writing poetry really, really help. And the same thing with flash fiction too. Writing in a very concise way really helps you when you're particularly longer pieces of fiction, because even in a full novel, you're still having to cut things. You're having to pare away at it. So those skills are really invaluable.
They sure are. I was talking to somebody this week who is helping someone else edit. Well, actually, I was talking to the editor and to the author, and the author is really struggling with cutting down on word count. And I said, yeah, we call that murdering your darlings. There's a book called Murder Your Darlings. You've had to murder a few darlings, haven't you?
Oh, yes, many times. I think the very first short story I sent out with Sigmund Bauer's encouragement, he encouraged me to write some children's stories. And I sent a story out to, I think it was one of the Focus on the Family magazines. And the editor wrote back right away, and she really liked the story. But she said, it's way too long for our age group, so you need to cut it in half. And when I read that, I thought, oh my goodness, really? You want me to cut this in half? But I started working away at it, and by the time I got it done, I realized it was a much better story in half of the words. Sometimes I've done that just on my own as a discipline. If I've written a short story or whatever, I'll take it and just keep cutting it down and cutting it down and cutting it down. I've entered a few contests where they're 100 words or 250. Usually they're either 100 or 250 or even 50 words, 50-word stories. And I really enjoy doing them. I really enjoy writing short, because you just have to focus on it so, intensely, and to get just the right words to say what you want to say.
Which sculptor said that he has to find?
Michelangelo.
What did he say?
He said that he was, when he was doing the David, he looked at the stone and then took away the parts that weren't necessary. Right. Basically, I think he said, I found the David within the slab of marble.
Oh yeah, that's beautiful. And that's what our writing is quite often. The writing that we've spilled onto the page, and every word seemed precious at the time, because who is it? Mark Twain says writing is easy. You just open a vein and bleed, or something. I think a few people say that same kind of thing. Yes. You pour it all out, but then you have to clean it all away and find out the real thing that's underneath there. So whatever the metaphor is, whether it's sculpting or whittling or cleaning up a mess, or there's so much just that doesn't belong, even though it seems so important at the time when it's all in one.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Noah Lukeman. I know I have his book behind me there somewhere. I think it's called The First 5 Pages. He talks about cracking open the sentences. And you've got a sentence, and then you look at it and you crack it open and you pare it down and you get to the essential. What are you really trying to say with that sentence? Get to the depth of it, kind of.
That's really good.
Yeah, that's really a good book. The first 5 pages by Melody.
I was in a workshop once where this woman with a very accomplished and fairly famous Christian hymn writer, and a woman in the audience said that she had received a poem or a song from the Lord, and just it arrived finished, and he stared at her, and then he said, "I don't know what you're talking about. I've never had that experience." And I thought, I felt two things. On one hand, I felt like he's right. Like there's craft, there's inspiration, and then there's craft. And the other thing I felt was, I felt so embarrassed and sorry for her because he was a little harsh in his delivery. But I thought he could have nuanced a little bit. And I thought it was a great opportunity to talk about craft. And the craft isn't always writing more. Developing a story doesn't always mean writing more. Often it means writing less, knowing what to leave out as well as what to leave in.
Exactly.
And just because things arrive feeling inspired, maybe they were, but they usually need some development.
Yeah, I think I've only had one poem in all my writing of poetry that I changed very, very little of it. When I just sat down and wrote it, and I think I maybe changed 1 or 2 words in the poem, and it's remained that way. But it was such a powerful image in my mind. It was a poem I wrote about a friend of mine who went sea kayaking off the coast of Alaska, and he fell asleep on his kayak. And when he woke up, he had his head down on the front of the kayak, and he opened his eyes, and there was a whale's eye right beside him. There was a whale right beside his kayak, and they just kind of floated along together, and the whale would roll up, and his eye would open, then he'd roll back down again, then he'd roll up again. And it was just such a powerful image in my mind, the way this fella described. And it was almost a spiritual experience for him. And so I sat down and wrote this poem. And I think, like I said, I only changed 2 words in that poem. But most other poems, I work and work and work and work and work at them. Sometimes there's 4 or 5 versions of the same poem.
So we've talked about why this type of writing, to learn this craft of poetry or flash fiction is important. What are you going to be doing in the courses? So the poetry class poetry camp is 4 days, an hour a day with homework. What else can you say about what you'll be doing?
Well, we're going to be paying attention to different forms of poetry a little bit. It will mostly focus on contemporary poetry, which is mostly free verse. But we will at one point take a look at some more formal forms of poetry, just because it's really good to study them and to try and write them, to know what they are. And that really helps when you're writing less formal poetry, because there are certain things that you need to include even in poetry that's free verse. I had an experience when I came out to the Banff School of Fine Arts. It was my graduation present to myself, to come out to the Banff School of Fine Arts and take a writing course. And one of the instructors was a poet, and so he asked us to give him some of our work. And I had some input from teachers through high school on my poetry, but not a great deal, and never really very critical. Most of it, they were always saying, "Oh, you're doing really well. Keep going, keep going." But I handed him this poem, and when he handed it back to me, he had made a couple of comments on it, and then he came up to me afterwards and he said, "I have to tell you," he said, this is good writing. He said, "I like the writing, but that is not a poem." And I was kind of crushed in one sense, but then he went on to explain why. And during the course of the teaching, he began to show me why. And so I really learned a lot from him through that time, and I've so appreciated it because I've read an awful lot of poetry that people have just put down lines on a page and assumed because it's in a poetic form of some kind, it's a poem, but it's not. Poetry has certain devices that are used, and if those aren't there, then it's really not a poem.
So why was that one not a poem?
The one that I wrote?
Mm-hmm.
Because I hadn't used any of those devices. I had told a story, but I hadn't, it was more prose than it was poetry. So, and there's a difference.
Right.
So we'll talk about that a bit. We'll be doing exercises. We'll talk about things like metaphor and simile and rhyme and rhythm and assonance and consonants and different devices that are used within poetry. And we'll have all of each of those exercises that we'll do. The students will submit one poem to me. They can write as many as they want, but they'll submit one to me, and then I will critique that poem and send it back to them. So we'll do that each day. There'll be an assignment to go out each day. Yeah, we'll be researching some of the more formal forms of poetry, and we'll play with things like unlikely modifiers, for instance, burning ice, found poetry, concrete imagery, all of those kinds of things that you find in good poetry. And I'll give examples each day too. There'll be examples of poets that I've found I really liked and who use these things really well.
Yes, and then at the end of the week, Marcia is going to choose one poem from each person, and we're going to publish Marcia's picks on a variety of our Serotonin platforms. We've got the Book Hatchery, we've got Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and so in a variety of places we'll be publishing these poems, kind of as a collection of the best of the students from the poetry camp. And then the fiction camp is a similar format, 5 days instead of 4, and writing a story every day. And what would you say about the fiction camp? What will be happening in that?
Well, we'll start off with talking about what is flash fiction and talking about there's different forms of it. Flash fiction technically is no more than 1,000 words, but many times it's much less than that. It's a common number for flash fiction is actually 250 words. So we will play around with writing different lengths of flash fiction, and often you'll find you kind of feel comfortable with a certain number of words. So once you kind of play around with the different lengths, then you'll find that one may really suit you, and then you can continue on in that. We'll practice all of the elements of good fiction, no matter what length it is. Things like show, don't tell, and devices like metaphor and simile, honing the emotional punch, which is really, really important in the short pieces. It has to be really carefully done because it's so short. And just developing that skill of making every word count and making sure that every word in your piece moves the story forward in some way. So we'll practice all of those things, skills that you need for writing any kind of fiction, no matter what length. They'll be the same for flash fiction, only they're more intense because it's such a short word count. And we will practice different word lengths. So we'll probably start off at 1,000 words and work our way down from there.
Right. And are you going to be, we were talking about whittling or sculpting and finding the David in the block of marble. That 1,000-word story, are you going to use that story and whittle that one down, or will it be a different piece every day?
They can choose what to do if they want to work with the same piece and just keep cutting and cutting, or they can begin a new one, whichever they prefer to do.
Okay. And then as with the poetry class, at the end of the week, Marcia will look at everything that everyone has submitted and choose one story per person that we will then publish on a variety of our Serotonin platforms so that each student can get some exposure. Now, this is not a requirement. This is an option. If you don't want your stuff published, we don't have to publish it, but it's an opportunity to get some of your work out there and seen, and we can include a link to something that whether it's social media or if you have a website or wherever your writing lives, if you want some exposure that way, this is a good opportunity. There's a registration bonus that when you sign up, you can get a PDF download of Marcia's book, her writer's journal, Abundant Rain, Volume 2. And so we'll put a link below this if you want to look at either of the poetry camp or the fiction camp.